The cameras glowed like a constellation of tiny suns, bathing the studio in soft light that made everything shimmer around it. Jimmy Kimmel leaned toward the lens with his trademark grin. His voice carried that easy mix of charm and humor that made millions tune in every night. Our next guest tonight is one of the most celebrated actresses in the world. She's an Oscar winner, a fashion icon, and one of the few people in Hollywood who can silence a room with a single look. Please welcome Nicole Kidman. The audience erupted into applause, the kind that starts polite and then swells into genuine excitement. Nicole appeared, graceful, deliberate, and elegant in a black satin blouse and tailored black pants. She smiled softly, not the wide Hollywood grin she used to wear, but something quieter, controlled. Her long blonde hair caught the light as she waved to the crowd. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk to greet her. "Nicole Kidman, everybody!" She shook his hand gently and settled into the plush chair opposite him. The applause faded. "Wow," Jimmy said, letting out a small breath. "It's really good to see you. How are you holding up?" Nicole smiled, a faint glimmer of humor in her eyes. "I'm all right, Jimmy, surviving the circus as usual." The crowd chuckled softly. Jimmy leaned back, studying her. "You say circus, but I think a lot of people out there would use words like storm, maybe even media hurricane." Nicole laughed quietly, her tone measured. "That's fair, it's been a lot of noise. But I've learned to let it pass through me instead of getting caught in it." It was a poised answer, the kind of thing only years of experience and pain could teach someone to say naturally. Jimmy nodded, his voice lowering just a touch. "You've been in headlines for months now, people talking, speculating, guessing. I think everyone watching tonight wants to hear it from you, not the tabloids. How are you really doing?" Nicole hesitated. For a second, the camera caught a flicker behind her calm, something human, raw, tired. "I'm healing. That's probably the best word for it. You spend years building a life, and when it changes, there's a part of you that has to catch up." The audience stayed quiet. Jimmy's eyes softened. "That's an honest answer, and I know it's been a tough few months. You and Keith were one of those couples people rooted for. Everyone thought they made it. They figured it out." When the news came out, people were shocked. Nicole's smile faded a little. "So was I, but sometimes what looks perfect isn't peaceful," she said simply. Her words landed like a soft blow. The audience exhaled collectively. Jimmy nodded slowly, giving her space. "That's a powerful line. What looks perfect isn't peaceful. When did you know it was not?" Nicole shifted slightly in her seat, her gaze focused just beyond the camera. "You never really know in one moment, it's small things. You start living side by side instead of together. You start talking about schedules instead of dreams. It happens quietly. One day you wake up and realize you've been living as partners in logistics, not in love." For a moment, no one in the room moved. Jimmy lowered his cue cards, abandoning the script. "Was that realization hard to accept?" Her voice dropped lower, softer. "It's always hard when love stops feeling like home. You want to fix it, but sometimes love and peace can't live in the same house anymore." The words echoed in the silence that followed. The studio, usually full of laughter and applause, now felt like a confessional. Jimmy spoke carefully. "You've been married almost 20 years. That's a lifetime in Hollywood. What did those years mean to you?" Nicole's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "Everything. They were my family, my foundation, my chaos, my comfort. We built a life, and even when it ended, that doesn't erase the beauty in it. It just means it changed shape." The audience began to applaud softly, not for entertainment, but respect. Jimmy looked at her for a moment, admiration in his eyes. "You've always had this ability to talk about painful things with grace. Most people would be angry. You sound grateful." She exhaled, nodding. "Gratitude is how you survive loss. You can't rewrite the past, so you find peace with it." Jimmy smiled gently. "I don't think anyone's ever made heartbreak sound so poetic." Nicole laughed, the sound genuine this time. "Maybe that's what happens when you've lived it twice." The audience murmured knowingly. Jimmy picked up on it instantly. "You're talking about Tom Cruise?" She smiled politely. "I'm talking about the past. It teaches you how to see people differently. I was very young then, 23, when I married Tom. I didn't know who I was yet. With Keith, I did. That's what made it harder." Jimmy's brow furrowed. "Harder in what way?" "When you lose love as an adult," she said, "you lose the version of yourself you built with it. You grieve the life you imagined." The crowd was silent again. Jimmy looked down at his desk for a moment, tapping his pen lightly. I want to ask something that might sound intrusive, but it's what everyone at home is wondering. Nicole gave him a patient look. Go on. Was there someone else? A soft gasp ran through the audience. Jimmy's tone was calm, not cruel, just curious the way only he could be. Nicole's expression didn't change. Her voice was composed, cool, and piercingly honest. No. It wasn't betrayal. It was exhaustion. Sometimes people don't fall out of love, they just wear it out. That line landed like thunder. Jimmy leaned back, stunned. The audience broke into spontaneous applause, some even standing. Nicole gave a small, almost shy smile. Wow, Jimmy said softly. You should be a writer. Nicole laughed lightly. I tell stories for a living, this one just happened to be mine. The tension eased for a moment, but Jimmy wasn't done. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his desk. You know, I think people saw you too as the exception. Hollywood meets Nashville. It felt authentic, like real love could exist in that world. Do you think fame played a role in what happened? Nicole considered this. Fame doesn't ruin love, but it magnifies the cracks. When you're both in the public eye, you start performing even at home. You forget how to just be quiet together. Everything becomes part of a narrative, and one day you realize you're living in headlines instead of moments. The audience listened in near silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Jimmy nodded slowly. That's a hard truth. How did you know when to stop trying? Nicole's expression softened again. When trying started to mean pretending, you reach a point where saving something starts to cost you yourself. A long pause. Even Jimmy didn't fill it. The moment felt raw, delicate, real. Finally, he spoke. That's incredibly brave to admit. I don't think it's bravery, it's clarity. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that you're breaking inside the life you built together, she said. Jimmy looked down, visibly moved. He glanced back up, smiling gently to shift the tone. So now that the dust has settled, how is life post-divorce treating you? Nicole smiled, faint but sure. Peaceful, quiet. I didn't realize how loud life had become until it stopped. The crowd chuckled softly, a release of tension. Jimmy nodded. You've been keeping a pretty low profile. What made you decide to come here tonight? I wanted to speak before others spoke for me. When a woman goes through something like this, people love to define her. Victim, survivor, ice queen, hero. I'm none of those, I'm just human, and I think sometimes people forget that, she said. The audience erupted into applause again. It wasn't excitement, it was solidarity. Jimmy smiled, shaking his head. You know, you're one of the only people who could turn a late-night show into a therapy session and make the audience thank you for it. Nicole laughed softly. Maybe they need it as much as I do. The laughter faded, leaving behind a quiet hum of respect. Then Jimmy leaned forward again, his tone gentle but probing. There's something everyone's noticed. You've handled this entire thing with such calm. No statements, no interviews, no public blame. That's rare these days. How do you do it? Nicole's answer came after a brief pause. By remembering that anger makes good headlines, but it doesn't heal hearts. I didn't want to add to the noise. I wanted to create silence, and maybe in that silence a bit of understanding. The audience fell still again. Jimmy looked at her closely. That's the kind of thing people remember, Nicole, she smiled faintly. Then I hope they remember the silence, not the scandal. The band quietly struck a soft chord as the segment neared its first break. Jimmy turned toward the camera. We'll be right back with more from Nicole Kidman. Don't go anywhere. The lights dimmed slightly, the applause rising once again. Nicole sat back in her chair, taking a slow breath, the smallest trace of emotion crossing her face before she smoothed it away. Jimmy leaned over during the cut to commercial. You're doing great, he said softly. She smiled at him. I didn't come to do great, I came to tell the truth. He nodded, glancing toward the producers who were buzzing in his ear. Well, it's working. Nicole turned toward the audience, some of whom were still clapping softly even though the cameras were off. Their faces were kind, supportive, some even emotional. For a moment, she looked moved. She whispered under her breath, barely audible even to herself. It wasn't what it looked like. The line lingered in the air like a secret. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the calm and grace, Nicole Kidman felt something she hadn't in months. Release. They took a short break. Jimmy took a sip from his mug, nodding toward her as he listened to a voice in his earpiece. When he turned back, he smiled. All right, Nicole, he said quietly. The next segment's lighter, I promise. She gave a small, grateful smile. I could use lighter. Good, Jimmy chuckled, because the producers think America might need to breathe again, too. The studio crew laughed, and for a brief moment the tension eased. But beneath the hum of the band and the shuffle of camera operators, Nicole's thoughts drifted somewhere else. She wasn't thinking about the cameras, or even the crowd. She was thinking about how strange it was, after months of silence, to finally hear her own voice filling the air again. The red light came back on. Jimmy turned to the audience with his easy grin. "We're back with the extraordinary Nicole Kidman, who has somehow managed to make my studio the quietest place in Los Angeles." The audience laughed and cheered. Nicole smiled politely. Jimmy leaned forward again, easing back into conversation. "Before the break, we talked about change, about finding peace, but I want to ask, was it difficult watching the story unfold in the press? There's been a lot said about you and Keith, some of it kind, some of it not so much." Nicole's eyes held his for a moment, then she said softly, "It's strange. You spend your life performing fiction, pretending to be other people, and then when something real happens, everyone else writes the fiction for you. It stops being your story." Jimmy nodded slowly. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she admitted. "You want to correct it, to defend yourself, but then you realize every word you speak feeds the same machine that's hurting you. So you go quiet. Silence is its own defense." The audience clapped lightly. Jimmy smiled, though his eyes stayed serious. "You've always had that kind of restraint, but it can't be easy watching your life become entertainment for strangers." Nicole gave a small shrug. "It's part of the trade. The public gives you fame, and in return you give them a piece of yourself. The trick is not to hand them everything." The audience murmured, impressed. Jimmy tilted his head. "I think that's something a lot of people forget. Especially when it comes to relationships in the spotlight." Nicole nodded. "Yes, everyone loves a love story, especially when they can pick it apart. We were everyone's idea of happily ever after. And when that ended, it wasn't just ours that broke. People take it personally when their illusion disappears." Jimmy leaned back, tapping his pen against his desk thoughtfully. "You know, I think that's why people are so invested. You two looked untouchable. You always seemed to have that kind of quiet chemistry that couldn't be faked." A small, wistful smile flickered across her face. "It wasn't fake. We did love each other. That's what makes endings complicated. When the love doesn't disappear, it just changes form." The studio was silent again. It was becoming a pattern: laughter, stillness, reflection. The rhythm of the night had shifted from talk show banter to something more intimate. Jimmy studied her for a long moment. "You make it sound almost peaceful." Nicole's eyes softened. "Peace comes after the chaos, not before it. And it doesn't come easy. You have to earn it by letting go of the need to be right, to be understood. Sometimes you never get closure. You just decide to stop reopening the wound." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Jimmy smiled. "I feel like I should be taking notes right now." "You probably shouldn't. It's easier said than done," she said playfully. The laughter broke the heaviness again. Jimmy leaned back in his chair. "Okay, let's talk about something else for a second. You've been working nonstop for decades, films, awards, producing all of it. When something like this happens, does work become your escape?" Nicole exhaled. "It used to be. I used to run straight into work because it gave me purpose. But now I'm trying to sit still. I realized I don't want to hide behind scripts anymore. I want to live a little in between them." "That's a big shift," Jimmy said. "It is. For years I was scared of stillness, but sometimes quiet is what you need to hear what life's been trying to tell you." The audience clapped softly again. Jimmy smiled, half teasing. "You're giving out wisdom like opera tonight." Nicole laughed, shaking her head. "Maybe I've just had time to think." Jimmy looked at her for a beat, then asked gently, "And what have you realized?" Nicole paused. Her gaze turned toward the audience for the first time. "That love doesn't fail. It just finishes. And when it finishes, you have to let it go before it turns bitter. You have to let people become who they are, even if that means they walk away from who you were together." It was quiet enough to hear the faint buzz of the studio lights. Jimmy nodded slowly, deeply. "That's heavy, but it makes sense, and I think a lot of people at home probably needed to hear that tonight." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I did too." The band played a light interlude. Jimmy looked toward the camera, then back at her. "You've talked a lot about peace, but what about strength? People look at you and think of resilience. Where does that come from?" Nicole thought for a moment. "It comes from breaking. People think strength means never falling apart. But for me, it came from realizing I could fall apart and still stand up again the next morning." The audience applauded again. Jimmy smiled. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said with a knowing look, "but it is necessary. For a few seconds, the two sat in silence, the moment hanging between them like an invisible weight. Then Jimmy reached for his next card, hesitated, and set it aside again. "Can I ask something that's not on the list?" he said quietly. Nicole nodded, wary but open. "If Keith were watching this right now, what would you want him to know?" Jimmy said. The question hit like a hush sweeping through the room. Even the band stopped moving. Nicole looked down, then back up. Her eyes glimmered under the stage lights, not with tears, but with thought. "I'd want him to know I don't regret any of it," she said finally. "Not the love, not the years, not the mistakes. We built something real. And I hope he remembers that, not the ending." A murmur of sympathy moved through the crowd. Jimmy nodded, his voice gentle. "That's beautiful," Nicole exhaled slowly. "It's honest." The applause that followed was different this time, longer, heartfelt, almost protective. Some audience members stood. Jimmy sat quietly for a moment, letting the moment breathe. When the applause finally faded, he smiled. "You've been doing interviews for decades, but this feels different." "What made you open up now?" Nicole looked at him, her voice steady. "Because I was tired of pretending everything was fine. Sometimes silence becomes a cage. You keep peace for everyone else until it stops feeling like peace inside you. Tonight, I just wanted to tell the truth, even if it's uncomfortable." The crowd erupted again. It was the most emotional reaction of the night. Jimmy's voice cracked with sincerity. "Well, for what it's worth, you did it beautifully." Nicole smiled, the kind of smile that comes from exhaustion and relief at once. "Thank you." Jimmy turned to the camera. "Nicole Kidman, everyone." That was something special. The band began to play, but the applause kept going. Nicole stood, shook Jimmy's hand again, and waved at the audience. As she walked off stage, the camera caught her silhouette against the soft blue lights, elegant, calm, and unshakably human. The applause followed her down the hallway until it faded behind the closing studio door. Outside, the corridor was dim and quiet, lined with framed photos of Hollywood legends who had walked this same stretch. Assistants offered her bottled water and compliments, but she barely heard them. She reached the end of the hallway and paused by the exit. Through the glass, she could see the city bright, sprawling, alive. For a long moment, she just stood there. It wasn't silence she felt now. It was clarity. She had said everything she needed to. And for the first time in years, the story belonged to her again. The next morning, Lowe's Angels woke not to sunshine, but to headlines. Nicole Kidman's late-night interview had exploded across every platform imaginable. Clips of her soft but unflinching voice filled feeds, trending under hashtags that mixed sympathy, shock, and speculation. Within hours, every outlet, from morning television to gossip blogs, had dissected her every word. By sunrise, the interview had crossed oceans. The BBC ran excerpts, Australian networks praised her composure, and entertainment pundits analyzed her tone like it was a chess move. But inside Nicole's quiet Lowe's Angels home, there was no noise. The curtains were drawn, the phone silenced, the television off. Nicole sat at the kitchen counter, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Her publicist had texted 10 times before 8 a.m. producers were calling from morning shows. Offers for follow-up interviews were already rolling in, but she didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the faint reflection of her face in the black marble countertop. For once, she didn't want to perform. She just wanted stillness. Her assistant, Grace, entered softly. "It's everywhere," she said. "People can't stop talking about it," Nicole nodded. "I figured." "You came off amazing," Grace continued. "The internet loves you right now. They're calling it your most honest interview ever." Nicole smiled faintly. "They loved me when I was married, too." Grace didn't respond. She knew better than to push. On the table beside them, Nicole's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a name that made her chest tighten. "Keith." She stared at it, the small white glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Then slowly she picked it up. The message was short. "I saw it. You spoke your truth. I hope it helps." No accusations, no emotion. Just a calm acknowledgement. It was, in a way, very him, the same understated courtesy that had defined their goodbyes. Nicole typed a response, then erased it. She wasn't sure what to say anymore. After a few seconds, she placed the phone face down on the counter. Across town, the same interview was playing on repeat in a Nashville hotel room. Keith Urban sat alone at the edge of his bed, guitar in hand, staring at the muted television. The image of Nicole on the screen was frozen mid-laugh, graceful, composed, radiant as always. He didn't turn the volume up. He didn't need to. He remembered every word. The late-night rerun had caught him off guard. He'd been on tour when it aired, finishing a show in Denver. His manager had texted, "She's on Kimmel, you might want to watch this." He hadn't wanted to, but he had. And now the words looped in his mind like a melody he couldn't stop hearing. What looks perfect isn't peaceful. You can love someone deeply and still recognize you're breaking. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. The truth in her words stung because he'd lived it too. They had both fought to hold something together that had long stopped breathing. Still, part of him wished she hadn't said it on television. His phone buzzed. His agent again. Calls from Rolling Stone, Billboard, The Guardian. They want a comment. Keith stared at the message and typed back, * no comment, no interviews. He picked up his guitar, strumming absent-mindedly. Music was where he went when words failed. But that morning, even the strings sounded hollow. By noon, social media was a battlefield. Some fans called Nicole brave, others accused her of dramatizing. A few tabloids hinted that she'd blindsided Keith. Morning talk shows replayed the interview in snippets, with hosts debating whether she'd spoken out of strength or sorrow. "The restraint was remarkable," one anchor said. "She looked like she was grieving," another countered. In New York, Jimmy Kimmel's production team watched the metrics climb in real time. It had become one of the most viewed late-night interviews of the year. Clips were everywhere, from newsreels to TikToks with piano soundtracks and subtitles that turned her lines into viral quotes. Jimmy himself was sitting in his office, scrolling through reactions. For years, he'd interviewed politicians, rock stars, and royals. Few moments had felt as genuine as last night's conversation. There had been no script, no spin, just truth. His producer knocked on the door. "That segment's pulled 7 million views overnight," she said. "They're calling it the Kidman moment." Jimmy smirked. "I didn't do anything, she just told the truth." "Yeah," the producer said softly. "That's what makes it rare." In Sydney, a different kind of reaction brewed. Australian media had always claimed Nicole as one of their own, and now her vulnerability struck a national chord. On breakfast TV, hosts replayed her lines with reverence. One commentator said, "Nicole reminded the world that grace isn't silence, it's the courage to speak without bitterness." Another added, "It's the first time she's looked like a person, not an icon." But not everyone saw it that way. In the crowded offices of a gossip magazine, an editor pointed to the still image of Nicole wiping her eye on screen. "That's the cover," he said. "Zoom in, headline it, 'Tears of Regret.'" "Regret?" a junior reporter asked. "She didn't cry." "Doesn't matter," the editor replied. "People love heartbreak more than healing." And just like that, the same honesty that had moved millions began to mutate into something else, content. By evening, Nicole's publicist, Ava, arrived at her home, laptop in hand and expression serious. "Okay, I've been tracking coverage," she said, sliding into a chair. 90% positive. There's some noise from tabloids, but mainstream outlets are praising it as authentic. Vogue wants an exclusive feature. The Times wants a column. Nicole sighed. "Ava, I don't want to turn this into a campaign." "I know, but this is your narrative now," Ava insisted. "For years, people saw you as untouchable. Last night, you reminded them you're human." "We can build on that." Nicole looked at her, half amused, half tired. "Build on heartbreak?" Ava hesitated. "On truth." Nicole smiled faintly. "Truth doesn't need branding." Ava's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. "Keith's camp just issued a statement." Nicole's eyes flickered. "What did he say?" "Just one line," Ava said. "He's asking for privacy and respect for his family." Nicole nodded slowly. "Good." That's exactly what he should say. There was silence between them for a moment. Then Nicole stood and walked toward the window. The sun was setting, bathing the city in gold. "I didn't go on that show to win," she said quietly. "I went because I was tired of pretending I wasn't hurting. Maybe people needed to see that." Ava watched her for a long moment, then closed the laptop. Well, they saw it. The world did. That night the world saw another image, Keith Urban stepping onto a dimly lit stage in Chicago. The crowd roared, expecting the same upbeat setlist, but tonight he played differently. When the first notes of * Blue Ain't Your Color filled the arena, his voice cracked slightly. Midway through, he changed the lyric, just one word, but enough for everyone to notice. The original line was, "Guess you don't need that heart of mine." He sang instead, "Guess you don't need that love of mine." The crowd went silent. cameras flashed, fans posted clips instantly. Within an hour, it was viral again, another piece of the story, another chapter for the world to debate. Back in Los Angeles, Nicole was scrolling through her phone in bed when she saw the clip. She watched it twice, then set the phone aside. There were no tears, no bitterness, just quiet understanding. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a message. It was closure disguised as song. 2 days later, Nicole's interview was nominated for a journalism award, a strange irony, considering it hadn't been journalism at all, just a conversation. Commentators debated her every phrase like scholars unpacking a poem. But while the media feasted, Nicole vanished. No red carpets, no interviews, no statements. For weeks, she stayed silent, retreating into the calm she'd been chasing all along. When she finally appeared again, it wasn't on a talk show or a glossy magazine. It was in a quiet public service video for mental health awareness, filmed in a sunlit field outside Sydney. She looked straight into the camera, no makeup, no script. "Sometimes," she said softly, "peace isn't found in staying quiet. It's found in saying what you need to say once, and then learning to live again." The clip went viral, just like the interview had. But this time there were no debates, no tabloid rewrites, just quiet respect. Across the ocean, Keith saw it too. He was backstage in Nashville, tuning his guitar when his assistant showed him the video. He watched silently until the end. Then he smiled faintly and said, "She looks at peace." The assistant nodded. "Yeah, she does." Keith strummed a soft chord, his voice low. "Good, she deserves that." And for the first time since everything had begun, the two people who once shared the same stage finally found the same silence apart, but at peace. The media kept talking, of course. The headlines would fade only to return again someday. But for Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, the story no longer belonged to anyone else. It wasn't performance anymore. It wasn't illusion. It was truth finally told, finally released. And under the soft Los Angeles sky, somewhere between endings and beginnings, Nicole smiled, not for the cameras, not for the world, but for herself.